There was nothing extraordinary about the morning light streaming through the gauzy curtains in our bedroom. The soft golden hue brushed across the polished wooden floor, warming the room in the way it always did. The same way it had for the last 8 years. And yet, as I sat at the edge of our bed, sipping lukewarm coffee from the ceramic mug we'd bought together in Prague, I felt something different stirring inside me, a quiet, unnameable ache. Daniel was already gone, off to work like clockwork. Always punctual, always dependable. That was the thing about Daniel, he was safe. Safe like a familiar song, like a road you've driven 100 times. His love was quiet and undramatic, and maybe that was what had once made me fall for him. But now, after almost a decade, that same quietness echoed through the corridors of our home like a silence too long sustained. It wasn't that Daniel had done anything wrong. He remembered anniversaries, he called me during lunch breaks, he kissed my forehead every night before sleep, whispering, "Good night, my love." But love, real, electric, soul-quaking love, wasn't just about remembering dates or saying the right things. It was about being seen, truly seen. And lately, I had started to feel invisible. I spent my days teaching literature at the university, losing myself in the tangled lives of fictional characters. Women who made reckless choices, who yearned, who burned, who broke. My students asked why so many of the female protagonists in 19th century novels seemed to be suffocating in their own homes. I smiled when they asked, never answering fully. I told myself I was content. I volunteered on weekends. I hosted dinner parties. I curated our life like a perfect gallery, everything in place, polished, pleasant. And then I met Adrian. He wasn't like Daniel, at all. He was one of the visiting lecturers, in town for a semester. He taught art history with the kind of passion that made the walls of the classroom pulse. His voice was low, deliberate. His eyes lingered too long. He didn't just listen when I spoke, he leaned in, as though trying to catch even the unspoken parts of my sentences. At first, it was harmless. Coffee in the faculty lounge. A shared laugh over how pretentious some academic conferences had become. A glance held a second too long. But there was something in those glances, something that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. He made me feel like I was still made of fire, not just gentle warmth. That night, after a particularly intense lecture on romanticism and rebellion in the arts, he walked me to my car. The sky was heavy with rain, the kind that hadn't yet started falling but threatened to. He brushed a strand of hair from my cheek and smiled, saying nothing. I felt my breath hitch. I went home and stood in the kitchen for 10 minutes before Daniel came in. He kissed my cheek and asked about my day, and I told him it was fine. But it wasn't fine. Something had shifted. I began to measure my days in moments with Adrian. Coffee breaks, stolen conversations, the way his eyes found me across the room. I knew the signs. I had read enough novels to know how these stories ended. I wasn't naive. I just couldn't stop. I tried to silence the voice inside me, the one that told me this was wrong. I reminded myself of our wedding vows, of Daniel's kindness, of the life we had built. But the more I tried to resist, the more I felt myself pulled toward the edge of something I didn't yet have a name for. And somewhere deep in my chest, a seed of guilt took root, quietly growing even as I smiled through dinner and laughed at Daniel's stories. I didn't know it yet, but I was already slipping. It began with words. Always words. Before anything real had formed between Adrian and me, there were conversations, intimate, slow-burning ones. They felt innocent on the surface, two old acquaintances reconnecting over books and memory. But under the surface, something was gathering. Like a storm cloud too far to hear but close enough to see. We started writing to each other. Emails, mostly. Sometimes voice messages late at night, wrapped in quiet laughter and echoes of regret. It didn't feel like betrayal, not yet. Just relief. Like slipping into water after walking for miles in heat. I remember the first email I saved in a folder titled Drafts, the one I never sent. It said, "I don't think I'm falling in love with you, Adrian. I think I'm remembering what it's like to be alive." Daniel was still kind, still thoughtful. He brought home pastries on Fridays because he knew I liked almond croissants. He rubbed my feet without being asked. And I hated that I couldn't feel more for it. I hated myself for noticing how quiet the house felt even with both of us in it. I began staying at the office late. Not because of work, but because the silence at home made me feel like I was slowly vanishing. With Adrian, my world felt textured again. Full of sharp light and possibility. He never tried to seduce me, not outright. But his gaze lingered when we spoke. His words held me a little too tightly. And I let them. One evening, I came home to find Daniel building a bookshelf. He'd always wanted a reading nook in the corner of the bedroom, and he had started it without telling me, a surprise. There were wood shavings on the carpet, the scent of pine in the air. When he looked up at me, his eyes lit up. "I thought we could finally build it," he said, brushing sawdust from his fingers. "Like we planned in our first apartment." I smiled and kissed him, a mechanical kiss, all muscle memory. Inside, I felt guilt coil up like smoke. I used to dream of that bookshelf. But now all I could think about was the way Adrian's voice sounded when he said my name, like it was a secret only he knew. There's something cruel in the way desire moves. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for the right moment. It just shows up, like a thief, and takes from you quietly. A few weeks later, Adrian invited me to an art exhibit in the city. I said no, at first. I told him I was married. That it was complicated. He replied with one line. "So is your silence." I went. The gallery was dim, lit only by the scattered glow of installations. Abstract pieces, all mood and texture. One of them was a sculpture made of broken mirrors. I stared at it for a long time. My reflection appeared in fragments, fractured and shifting. That was the night something changed between us. Not physically, not yet, but irrevocably. We stood too close. Said too little. Every moment felt like a held breath. I came home late. Daniel was asleep. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I lay beside him that night wondering how I got here. How a woman who once promised forever could be lying in bed thinking of another man. I told myself nothing had happened. That I had made no choices yet. But the truth was, I was already somewhere else. Not in body, but in soul. Mornings became the hardest part. The daylight made everything feel more exposed. I would wake up next to Daniel, his breathing soft and steady, his arm sometimes still resting on my waist. And I would lie there, motionless, staring at the ceiling, pretending not to feel the weight of another man's name in my chest. Adrian had become the echo behind everything. Every joke Daniel told reminded me of a quieter laugh I'd shared elsewhere. Every dinner we ate made me think of the cafe where Adrian and I lingered too long over cold tea. The betrayal wasn't physical yet, but it had already taken root. It had made a home in me. Daniel didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but he chose not to speak of it. He would ask me how work was, if I was tired, if I needed anything. Always gentle, always thoughtful. And somehow, that gentleness made the guilt worse. Like watching someone wrap a gift while you're holding the receipt for returning it. One Sunday morning, we visited Daniel's parents. A family brunch, the kind we used to enjoy when we were newly married. His mother hugged me, her perfume like rosewater and old memories. She told me how radiant I looked. I smiled and felt like glass. In the garden, Daniel reached for my hand. I let him hold it. His thumb brushed over mine with that old rhythm, slow, certain. My stomach twisted. I had loved him. I still did, in a way. But what kind of love was this? Something had changed, quietly but irreversibly. Like a melody that had gone slightly off-key and now couldn't be tuned back. Later that week, Adrian sent me a photo of a painting, one of the pieces we had seen at the exhibit. The broken mirrors. The message said only, "This is what you looked like that night. Beautiful, but not whole." I didn't respond. I told myself I needed space. That I needed to fix what was breaking inside my marriage. But the truth was, I didn't know if I wanted to fix it. I was standing on a line, one foot on each side, and the longer I stayed there, the more the ground gave way beneath me. Eventually, something had to crack. It happened on a Tuesday. Daniel and I were cooking dinner together, chopping vegetables, listening to jazz. He asked me about my day. I told him it was fine. Then he looked at me, really looked, and said, "Are you happy, Elena?" And I froze. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I had too many. I wanted to say yes, because I should have been. I wanted to say no, because I wasn't. But mostly, I wanted to say, I don't know anymore. He didn't push me. He just nodded and kept stirring the soup. But the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was a silence full of knowing. We didn't speak of it again that night. Later, when I checked my phone, there was another message from Adrian. No words. Just a voice recording. I hesitated before playing it. His voice was soft, a whisper really. "I don't want to take you away from anyone. I just want to be where your truth lives. Even if that's not with me." I cried. Quietly. Alone in the bathroom. The kind of crying that leaves no traces except the exhaustion that comes after. By now, my life was divided into two cities. Two lives. Two versions of me. One of them wore a gold band and cooked dinners on Tuesday. The other stood in front of broken mirrors, wondering which reflection was real. And both of them were lonely. In those days, I lived in two worlds. One was the world of Daniel, our morning coffees, the Sunday cookies I always baked, the way his hand would rest beside mine on the pillow while he slept. He was still kind. He still knew where my back ached and would rub it gently in the elevator when I held my breath from stress. He still laughed at my stories, even if he'd heard them a dozen times. In that world, there was routine. There was gentleness. There was memory. And the other world was Adrian. With him, I wasn't a wife. I was a woman. I could be quiet or wild, soft or sharp. I could disappear and come back, and he wouldn't demand an explanation. He'd just look at me like I was a question he wanted to spend years answering. There were no expectations, only discovery. He didn't know my roles, only my impulses. With him, I didn't think about laundry, didn't count days, didn't wait for the weekend. Everything was now. Adrian saw me. Not the version of me that cooked dinner, folded clothes, sent birthday reminders to his family. He saw the version that I'd tucked away years ago, the one who wrote poems on receipts and listened to music just to feel something. The one who cried during thunderstorms and laughed during sex. That version of me had been quiet for a long time. And with him, she was loud again. But it wasn't just him. It was who I became with him. Still, Daniel had his own gravity. There was comfort in our silence. There was a soft, woven love in the way he poured my tea without asking how I liked it. Because he already knew. There were years between us, years like sediment in the riverbed, quiet, unseen, but deeply there. And I began to drift, not between two men, but between two versions of myself. Some nights I came home and stared at Daniel's sleeping face and hated myself for betraying him, for betraying that gentle, unspoken trust. Other nights, I would lie awake with Adrian's words echoing in my mind, wondering if maybe what I felt with him was something I had been starving for all along. I didn't know who I was anymore, the loyal wife or the restless woman. I didn't know which part of me was real, and which was just afraid to die unnoticed. And in that not knowing, I began to lose my balance. I was standing on the edge of something, a cliff, a truth, a choice. I didn't know which yet. But I knew the fall was coming. It didn't unravel all at once. It never does. Instead, the silence began to stretch. The look in Daniel's eyes, a glance too long, a question unasked, became harder to meet. My smiles felt borrowed. My sentences stopped halfway, trailing into a kind of sadness I couldn't explain. And I stopped laughing at his jokes, not because they weren't funny, but because I felt like a stranger wearing my own face. One evening, I sat in the kitchen and watched him reading the news on his phone, his brow furrowed just slightly, a small crease forming, a detail I had memorized over years, like the lines of a familiar road. And I thought, he trusts me. Still. And that thought broke something in me. I met Adrian 2 days later, intending to end it. I told him I couldn't live like this anymore. That I couldn't love in two directions. That I felt like a rope being pulled at both ends, slowly unraveling in the middle. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, as if memorizing my face, not to hold it, but to let it go. "Do you love him?" he asked finally, quietly. I opened my mouth, but the answer didn't come. Do you love me? He asked again. And I didn't answer that either. Because I didn't know. Not in a way that could survive the weight of reality. What I felt for Daniel was old and deep, like the roots of a tree that had weathered seasons. What I felt for Adrian was fire and light and music, wild, fleeting, intoxicating. One grounded me. The other woke me. But I couldn't live in both worlds. And I didn't know who I was without them. Without Daniel, I feared I'd lose my foundation. Without Adrian, I feared I'd lose myself. So I left Adrian on that bench. I walked away, my chest tight with a kind of grief I couldn't name. And I went home to Daniel, to the life I had built. But I carried the silence of that choice like a second skin. I didn't confess. I couldn't. Instead, I lived with it, the guilt, the ache, the truth I folded away like a letter I'd never send. And now, I exist in the space between them. Not with Adrian. Not fully with Daniel either. I live in that quiet place where decisions echo and time refuses to heal what the heart won't name. I don't know who I'll stay with. I only know I lost something in both of them. And maybe, in the end, what I lost most was myself.